We're starting a brand new series today that I'm really excited about, and this is simply called The Gifts. And this series, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be exploring the gifts that the Magi brought to Mary and to Joseph and to Jesus. And you probably remember what those gifts are. They were gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And we're going to be unpacking the symbolism behind those gifts that help us to realize who the ultimate gift was, Jesus, right? And so I really believe if you'll stay with us in this series, you're going to learn some things about who Jesus is and how these gifts just prophetically point to that. So to begin with, let's look at Matthew chapter 1, or actually Matthew chapter 2, beginning with verse 1. And it says this, it says, Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea during the reign of King Herod. About that time, some wise men from eastern lands arrived in Jerusalem. So we're introduced to these wise men who arrive from distant lands. We know that they come from the east, and in some of your translations, they're called Magi. These would be deeply intellectual type of people, very respected people. And tradition tells us that they might have even been people who didn't necessarily worship the one true God, but they had an openness. They were individuals who were seeking. They wanted understanding. They wanted to know who God was. And so in all of their studies, they had seen these prophecies regarding a star in the sky that would lead to not just any ordinary king. This whole attempt, this pilgrimage that they were making wouldn't be worth it for just an ordinary king. They were looking for this king that would be above all kings that was being born. And so they go on this pilgrimage, and most scholars believe that they were coming from Persia. So that probably doesn't mean a whole lot to you unless you're like a world geography nerd. But when you think about the distance between Persia and Bethlehem, we believe conservatively the least amount of distance would be about 900 miles. Most likely this was about 1,200 miles that they would travel to get to Bethlehem. Now, again, that probably means nothing for a lot of us, so I put in Journey Church's address, and I asked Google, hey, what is a major city that is about 900 miles away from here? And basically came up with 887 miles away from here is Denver, Colorado. So can you imagine, you see a star in the sky, you're with some buddies, no alcohol is involved in this, okay? And you decide this star must be pointing to a king that is being born. We should travel to see this king. And oh, by the way, there's no iPhones back then. There's no GPS devices whatsoever. There's no way of communicating at all once you leave and you start out for the destination. All they have is some ancient maps and a star in the sky. But they're seeking. They're hungry. They want to know who is this that is being born. They want to actually encounter this individual for themselves. They want to be able to see him with their own eyes. And so they begin to travel. And they end up first in Jerusalem. And in the midst of that, they encounter Herod, and they have this whole conversation with Herod, and we're not going to get into all that. But finally, they end up at their destination in Bethlehem. And we pick up in verse 11. It says, these wise men, these magi, they entered the house and saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and they worshiped him. Then they opened their treasure chests and gave him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh, right? And so many times when we look at this story, we think of these, they're in their elegant gowns and they're entering this home that probably would have been lower income dwellings. We know that Mary and Joseph did not have much money. And we know that specifically by the gifts that they offered at the temple when they went to Jerusalem. They were not individuals of wealth. And so you have these men who have incredible wealth, incredible influence, very respected throughout the world. And they enter into this lower income home. And they offer these gifts, and there's kind of this old joke that if these would have been the three wise women, that they probably would have brought some practical gifts like diapers or, a casserole or baby wipes or something like that. But instead it's these guys, and these guys give these gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And yes, they're incredibly valuable. I mean, probably most of us in this room were like, I don't know much about frankincense and myrrh, but give me some gold, right? Like I'll take that, right? And we know these gifts are valuable, but probably what maybe a lot of you don't know is how incredibly prophetic each one of these gifts would be, and how each one of these gifts point to an attribute of Jesus, that Jesus wasn't going to stay a baby. Jesus was going to grow up. And these gifts point to the prophetic nature of who Jesus would be, that still 2,000 years resound in our hearts and our lives. And so each week we're going to take one of these gifts and we're going to talk about what its meaning really is for us today. And we're going to start not with gold. We'll leave that for the last week. We're going to start with frankincense. And so I have this green box up here because as a kid, anytime I would hear frankincense, in the Christmas, dramas and stuff that we would do, I heard frankincense and I could only think of one word. There was only one word that entered my imagination, and that was the word Frankenstein. Anybody with me? And so in my mind, I had no idea what frankincense was, but I was sure it had to be green and gooey and be creepy, right? Like it had to be somehow. So when I thought of a box that would represent frankincense, that's what I came up with, is this green box. But when I started studying what frankincense was, and I didn't have to go too far because we have an essential oil expert in our home, my wife. And I started asking her about frankincense, and then I did also some study on the side. But frankincense is kind of the Swiss Army knife of essential oils. Like frankincense has it. In fact, I even have, it's in my pocket. I have a little vial of it over here. Frankincense is one of these things that whether you have respiratory issues or whether you have inflammation or whether you just are stressed out, frankincense is one of these oils and it comes from a tree, and we could get into all that. But man, the smell of this, it just takes the stress away, Like all of a sudden there's an Enya song playing in the background, and sail away, sail away, sail away. That's really horrible, and I apologize. What's that? Yeah, accurate, right? This is such good stuff. And I started after the first service, I had people come up and instead of having them smell it, I started putting it on their palms, and then somebody told me how much this vial was, and Carrie's back in kids, and she doesn't know how much of it I was like putting on people's palms. I'm going to be in trouble later on. I guess it's also expensive. But so this is what frankincense would be. But here's the deal. Mary and Joseph, because of being lower income, would have had no access to frankincense. This is not something they would go to their local neighborhood essential oil dealer and have a bunch of it in their pantry. Like, they didn't have access. So they didn't normally smell frankincense. But when they opened that, I imagine them uncorking that vial. And when they smelled it, it instantly took them to one place and one place alone. It took them to the temple in Jerusalem. Because frankincense, I don't know if you know this, but in the Old Testament, frankincense is mentioned a lot. It's mentioned specifically in Exodus and Leviticus and Numbers. Frankincense was an essential part of first of all, the tabernacle worship, and then later on, the temple worship. Frankincense would be part of as a sacrifice would be burned, there'd be that frankincense would be part of the aroma that would be added into the sacrifice, and this would go up to God as the prayers of the people would go up to God. And so when Mary and Joseph, gold, they understood the gold and the myrrh, and we'll get into the myrrh next week, but the frankincense, immediately when they would smell that aroma, they would think of the temple, and they would think of the worship, and they would think of the priests. And the priests in the Old Testament would burn this frankincense during sacrifices, the rising smoke symbolizing the prayers of God's people ascending to heaven. And that's why frankincense, in this first week, frankincense points to the fact that Jesus is our high priest. Jesus is our high priest. Would you say that with me? Jesus is our high priest. Jesus is our high priest. And Jesus came to mediate so that we could live. Jesus came to mediate so we could live. So what in the world does it mean to mediate? Jesus came to mediate so we could live. What does that mean? To mediate, a mediator is one who steps between two conflicted parties in order to bring a reconciliation, to bring restored relationship, to bring peace. And to this day, in the court systems, you'll hear of a mediator, or you'll hear this reference sometimes in international disputes that they'll fly in a mediator. Back when I was a kid, it seemed like it was always Jimmy Carter. You know, he wasn't that great of a president, I guess, but the presidents after him would put him in a jet plane and send him to Haiti or send him to some other place. And he was the mediator who would come between two conflicted parties to restore relationships, to bring peace, right? But Jesus, our high priest, came to mediate so we could live. And you say, well, what are the conflicted parties? What are the parties that are conflicted here? The conflicted parties ultimately are God and humanity. You say, well, what's the conflict? What's going on there? Sin. Sin is what's going on there. So God sets in motion, we're going to get into the sin issue in just a moment, but God sets in motion in the Old Testament this system where our sin would be dealt with through priests. And priests basically had two functions. Priests would make sacrifices for sin, and it was bloody and nasty, and an innocent animal would be sacrificed on behalf of guilty people. And so part of the role of a priest was to make sacrifices for sin. But secondly, the priest would pray on behalf of the people. He represented the people before God. So basically, you had the function of priests being sacrifices and prayers, and that's how the priest would mediate between God and man. And this was all necessary because of what I just mentioned a moment ago, because of sin. When we hear sin, I don't know what you think of. I grew up in church world, and so sin was talked about all the time, but we live in a culture that doesn't like to talk about sin. We don't like to think of ourselves as sinners. We would rather think of ourselves as mistakers, right? And when we do sin, we think of all the excuses for why we sin. We don't like the sin in other people, but, for me, I did that because I was hungry, or I did that because I was angry, or I did that just because I was tired, and so please give me excuses in my actions. We don't want to give the other people the benefit of the doubt, but we want other people to give us the benefit of the doubt, right? But sin, think about this, and if you've been around here, you hear us talk about this all the time. But think about this. God originally created humanity to have a perfect relationship with him. I mean, when he created Adam and Eve, like Adam and Eve walked with God, and they talked with God, and they knew God in a way that we can't even begin to imagine today. They knew the heart of God. They were known by God. God knew them completely and perfectly. And not only that, but think about their relationship with each other. Adam and Eve, their relationship with each other. There's a scripture verse that when I was in middle school and we were in church and the preacher would use this verse, we would all snicker and elbow each other and get into our best, impersonations of different cartoon characters. And it was this verse that they were naked and not ashamed. We do our Beavis and Butthead, laugh right there. Naked, he said naked. They were naked and not ashamed, but this idea was that there was no secrets, there was no shame, there was no insecurities, there was no fear. Can you imagine having a relationship like that with another person? Can you imagine having that in your marriage or having that with your best friend, having this, not the naked part with your best friend, that would be weird, but the part of that you could be completely yourself with that other person. That you wouldn't be putting on a front, that you wouldn't be trying to impress, you wouldn't be trying, you could just totally be yourself with another person with no fear of shame. God created us to know him, to have an intimate relationship with him, to have proximity and closeness with him, to know his heart, and he created us to have that with other people. But then something happened. What happened was sin. And sin disrupted everything. Sin is this idea, it's believing the lie of the enemy that God was holding out, that God didn't really love them, that God couldn't really be trusted. And so humanity decides, I'm going to do things the way that I want to do them. I know how God has told me to do things, but I'm going to do things the way that I want to do it. And so sin creeps into the picture, and everything is disrupted in that moment. Everything. Not just the relationship that humanity was designed to have with God, but the relationship that God wanted us to have with each other. Sin messes it all up. And because of that, now there is this distance between us and God, and we feel it. We feel it every day. We want to have a closeness with God, but we feel that distance. And we feel that distance with one another, don't we? And this is why there's so much conflict in this world, because of sin. And so because of sin, God says, well, sin has to be somehow dealt with, and it'd be helpful if I got into my notes in the right place. See, what complicates all of this is that God is holy. We treat sin casually because we don't understand the holiness of God. God is holy. Holy is this word that means set apart, other, completely pure. God is not simply better than us. God is other than us. He is completely unique. He's uncreated. He's set apart. And that holiness causes a serious problem because God is holy and you are not, and I am not. In fact, Romans 3:23 says it this way, for everyone has sinned. Turn to the person next to you and say, everyone. Turn to your second choice and say, that includes you. Right? Think about that. For everyone has sinned. And then look at the rest of the verse. He says, for all fall short of God's glorious standard. See, this is the essence of sin. Sin is I do not measure up to the holiness of God, to the perfection of God, to the otherness of God. And because of that, sin damages everything. It damages our lives. It separates us from God. It separates us from others. And that's why God hates sin. He hates sin because he sees what it does to humanity. He sees how it destroys what he loves. And so God set in motion a way of dealing with sin. And he created this priestly system where once a year on the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur, the high priest would enter the Holy of Holies and sacrifice an innocent animal, sprinkling its blood on the mercy seat. And the high priest would burn frankincense and the smoke rising to the sky like prayers. It was brutal. It was bloody. We don't like to think about this part of it, but this whole sacrificial system was so bloody, so brutal. We were talking about this in between services. We were back here, a couple of us were talking, and how we mentioned Yom Kippur and the Day of Atonement, and that was a once a year, that was an annual event where the high priest was involved and they went into the Holy of Holies. But honestly, the sacrificial system was actually a daily event as well. And I think you would almost have to have an Excel sheet to keep track of all the different sacrifices that were required. I mean, it was crazy to try to keep track of all this. It was bloody, it was unfair, it was hard to watch. And we wonder, I've had people ask me, why would God set this system in place? Because God is just. And sin has to be punished. And that messes with us, right? But it was a couple months ago that Jim came up here during communion and asked that same question. Why does God require a sacrifice? God is just. A just means that you're a perfect judge. A perfect judge has to sentence those who have broken the law. If he doesn't, he wouldn't be a perfect judge, right? In fact, we'd be looking for figuring out how to impeach them or how to get them out of office, right? Like, we want a judge who upholds the law. Well, we want a judge who upholds the law for everybody else. We don't necessarily want a judge who upholds the law for us. But because he's just, sin has to be punished. It has to be dealt with. But here's the thing. God is not only just, God is merciful. He provides a substitute for the punishment. And the sacrifice satisfies justice. It extends mercy. But the problem is, here's the problem with all of it. It was temporary. Sacrificing an animal was a temporary solution. It was a covering, not a lasting cure. And this is where the good news begins, is that Jesus becomes our high priest. Jesus came to mediate once and for all so that we could live, and not just live, but live. Like have life eternal. So we're no longer under the old covenant. We have something infinitely better. The writer of Hebrews, in Hebrews chapter 10, verse 10, says, for God's will was for us to be made holy by the sacrifice of the body of Jesus Christ. Think about that. Look at those words again. God's will was for us to be made holy by the sacrifice of the body of Jesus Christ. It was Jesus' body, Jesus, the Son of God, holy and perfect, offers his body voluntarily of his own accord to become the sacrifice for our sins. And then there's this phrase at the very end of this verse, verse 10. The phrase is once for all time. See, the priests repeated sacrifices daily, but Jesus, our perfect high priest, offered himself once for all. Not a temporary covering, a complete cleansing. Sin had created a divide between a holy God and a broken people, one that we could never cross on our own. We didn't just need advice, we needed a bridge. We didn't just need improvement, we needed reconciliation. And so Jesus came to mediate once and for all so that we could live. Jesus, our great high priest, stepped into the gap, fully God, fully man, placing one hand on humanity and one hand in the heavenlies. And he stood for us, and he paid the price. And because Jesus mediates for us right now, we don't approach God as beggars hoping for mercy. We approach him as sons and daughters, confident in grace. So I was thinking about a way of maybe illustrating this. And here's what I thought of is, and there's so many different passages in Scripture that point to this. See, we come to Jesus, and often you'll hear people, in fact, I just had a conversation last week with a buddy who hasn't been to church in a while, hasn't been following Jesus. I said, hey, when are you going to come back? And he goes, hey, I'm working on myself. Literally use that phrase, I'm working on myself. Like, basically what he was saying, he didn't use these words, but it was like, once I get myself figured out, then I'll come to God. Once I can get clean, once I feel like I've got it going, then I'll come back to God, right? And I hear this a lot, and maybe you've thought this as well. Like, I've got to make myself presentable in order to come to God. But the truth of the matter is, we are all nasty. We were out with some friends the other night, and we were talking about this idea of being nose blind. Have you ever heard this idea of being nose blind? Where you stink, but you don't smell that you stink, but everybody else smells that you stink. The best illustration of this is anybody who's a grandparent or parent or aunt or uncle, you'll understand this. And I love all of our kids in here. But there's this magical age of life called the middle school years. And the middle school years they're just brutal, right? They're horrible. And a few people get through them unscathed and love their middle school years, but probably a lot of us, if I had a show of hands, most of us would say, if we could have just skipped over those middle school years, life would have been a whole lot easier. I'm seeing heads nodding all over the place, right? Like, middle school is brutal. But one of the things that's brutal about middle school is we are absolutely nose blind when we're in middle school, right? And I won't throw any one of my kids under the bus with this illustration, but I remember times where we'd be getting ready to go. Maybe we're going out to eat. Maybe we're going to go shopping. Maybe we're going to a church event. And I do the classic dad move where I'm like doing the countdown. Like, hey, we're leaving in 30 minutes. Make sure you're ready in 30 minutes, right? And then, hey, we're leaving in 10 minutes. Make sure you're ready. And then finally it's like, hey, we're leaving. I need you at the door. We're getting in the car. And one of the kids would come, and they're wearing the same clothes that they've been wearing for like the last 4 days. They smell like BO, and their hair's matted. And they're like, and you just look at them and they're like, what? What? And you're like, you stink. When did you last take a shower? Like, what's wrong with you, right? They're nose blind, right? They don't even know how much they stink. They don't even know how much. And this is us with God. We're like, what? And God is like, you stink. Right? And there's passages of Scripture that actually speak. In fact, in our Bible in 1 year today, we're in Zechariah. In Zechariah chapter 3, it talks about this priest named Joshua and how God removed his ugly, nasty clothes, and he cleansed him, and he put on new clothes, even a new turban on his head. And this is what we come to God, and we're filthy and we're nasty. There's this passage in the Old Testament that talks about that we think we're all great, but our righteousness is as filthy rags. And when you look at the Hebrew behind the filthy rags, it is gross. And as a preacher, I don't even want to say like what all is involved in the Hebrew, but it's basically like menstrual cloths that have been out in the sun for a long time. And they smell and they're nasty. And we're like clinging to all of this. And God is like, Oh, no, you're not. You can't get in my car smelling like that. You can't get in my car looking like that. Like, you're nasty. And we're like, what? Right? But here's the mercy of God. Here's the greatness of God. And we see this in Luke chapter 15 in the story of the prodigal son. We have this punk kid who basically told his dad, I wish you were dead. I know you're not dead yet, but I want my portion of the inheritance now. And he takes his inheritance and he goes and he absolutely squanders it. There's an economic collapse, and the next thing you know, the only job that he can get is in a pig pen, which for a Jewish boy is not a great place to be. And he's starving to death, and one day he comes to his senses and he goes, man, the servants in my dad's house have it better than I have it right now. Maybe my dad would let me be a servant. And think about this. He's in a pig pen, smelling like pigs. Pigs smell, y'all. They stink. We don't see the verse that he cleaned himself off. He goes from the pig pen and he heads to his dad's house. And while he's from a distance, his dad had been watching and waiting. And his dad goes running to him. And this kid's got this whole speech memorized of what he's going to say and how repentant he's going to be. And his dad's like, shh, I don't want to hear it. Take off that stank clothes and put on my robes around him. Put on my sandals, right? This is what Jesus, our high priest, he came to mediate so that we can live. He came to cleanse us and to take off our filthy, we call it righteousness, but it's stank. He says, get rid of that. I want to cleanse you and I want to put my robes of righteousness on you. You don't have to live the way that you've been living. This is what Jesus, our high priest, does. This is how much he loves you. You see, when we talk about sin, a lot of times people are like, oh, there they go, talking about sin. God is such a, he must be so offended by my life. Yes, but he made way so that you don't have to stink no more. You don't have to live in that place any longer. I love that Hebrews 4, chapter 4, verses 14 through 15. So then, since we have a great high priest who has entered heaven, Jesus, the Son of God, there it is, Jesus is our high priest, right? Let us hold firmly to what we believe. This high priest of ours understands our weaknesses, for he faced all of the same testings we do, yet he did not sin. See, not only is Jesus our great high priest, and not only did he come to mediate so we could live, but think about, he did it in a way of saying, hey, I understand what you are going through. Whatever you're going through, he knows. Are you stressed? This could be a stressful season, can't it? Remember, Jesus is in the Garden of Gethsemane, and you remember what he said in the garden? He said, my soul is overwhelmed to the point of death. That's some stress. When you are stressed, you can go to Jesus, your high priest, who understands, who says, I've been stressed. Do you have family drama? You don't have to, if it's going to mess things up, just look straight ahead and don't give any body language, right? Right? I don't know if you knew this. This is in the Gospels, and we don't talk about this enough. Jesus' family members, specifically his siblings, literally thought he was crazy. That's some family drama, isn't it? Have you been betrayed? Someone that you thought loved you, someone who said all the right things, and then they just throw you under the curb, throw you to the curb? Jesus was betrayed by his close friend. Have you ever felt abandoned by God? Remember the words of Jesus as he's hanging on the cross, and he says, my God, what's the word? Why have you forsaken me? To Jesus, our high priest, he came to mediate so we could live, but he did it in a way. He could have done it clinically. He could have done it where it's just, okay, stand from a distance. We'll take care of that. We'll cleanse you. New clothes. Okay, don't talk to me. That's not what he does. He says, I understand. You can come to me. And then look at verse 16. This is the very next verse. He says, so let us come boldly to the throne of our gracious God. There we will receive his mercy, and we will find grace to help us when we need it most. I think that these are words that so many of us know, and yet we don't live these words out at all. Let us come boldly to the throne of our gracious God. See, when I'm stressed or when I feel betrayed or when I'm experiencing family drama, you know what I do? I go to social media. Or I go home and I open the fridge and I eat everything in it. Or I sit in the couch and I binge watch ESPN or Netflix. But the invitation, did you hear the invitation? I want to say it one more time, verse 16. Let us come boldly to the throne of our gracious God. Well, why? Because there we will find mercy. There we will find grace. There we will find what we've been looking for all along. We don't come with timidity. We don't come formally. We don't come after we've cleaned ourselves up. We come honestly. We come humbly. We say, Jesus, have mercy on me, but we come. And there's an invitation for you today as we enter this Christmas season, this season of anticipating the arrival of Jesus. And not just anticipating his arrival that was 2,000 years ago, but we're anticipating his arrival once again. We come and we say, Jesus, I've been nose blind. I see your holiness and I see you and I go, what? I don't realize what you have to offer. So Jesus, would you cleanse me and would you clothe me in your righteousness? And would you sprinkle your frankincense? I don't have to smell the way that I used to. I don't have to look the way I used to. I don't have to talk the way that I used to. I can be completely different. But the invitation is, what do I have to? Jesus did all of the work. He just says, come. Come boldly. Come boldly to the throne of our gracious God. So in a moment, we're going to hear this song, and we're going to have the lyrics up on the screen, but I don't want you to sing. I want you to either A, meditate on those words and think about what those words mean, or maybe just even bow your head and just have a time of prayer right where you're at, or maybe some of you need to actually physically move and find a space. There's times in my life where God moves are often the times where I step out of where I am and I find a different space. You say, Jesus, I'm here for you. So maybe you're here in this Christmas season and you say, I need Jesus. I need his forgiveness. I need his mercy. I need his grace. I'm going to come to him, not because I deserve it, not because I've earned it, but I come to him and I say, Jesus, have mercy on me. Cleanse me and clothe me. So we're going to hear the song and then I'll come up and do a closing. If you want to come, you're welcome to, and maybe even find a place of prayer during the song as well.
Come out of sadness from wherever you've been. Come broken-hearted, let a rescue begin. Come find your mercy, sinner, come kneel. Earth has no sorrow that heaven can't heal. Earth has no sorrow that heaven can't heal. So lay down your burdens, lay down your shame, and all who are broken, lift up your face. Oh, wanderer, come home. You're not too far. hope for the hopeless, all who have strayed. Come sit at the table, come taste the grace. There's rest for the weary, rest that endures. Earth has no sorrow that heaven can cure. So lay down your burdens, lay down your shame. All who are broken, lift up your face. Oh, wanderer, come home, 'cause you're not too far. So lay down your hurt, lay down your heart, come as you are. Come as you are. Fall in his arms. Come as you are. There's joy for the morning. Sinner, be still. Earth has no sorrow that heaven can heal. Earth has no sorrow that heaven can't heal. So lay down your burdens, lay down your shame. All who are broken, lift up your face. Oh, wanderer, come home. You're not too far. So lay down your hurt, lay down your heart, come as you are.
Here's the great thing about this invitation is that it's not an invitation just for 9:30 in the morning on Sundays. This invitation to come to the throne, to come with boldness, is an invitation for this evening, in the middle of the night, tomorrow as you're driving to work or you're on the school bus. It's an invitation of wherever you are, whatever what's going on, whether you're grieving or you're angry or you're conflicted or you're addicted, whatever's going on, that you can come to the throne with boldness. And you have a heavenly Father who, because Jesus is our high priest and Jesus is the one who mediates so that we could live, you have a heavenly Father who says, I don't see your stank and your filthiness. I see the righteousness of Jesus. And I have mercy and I have grace available for you. I'm not mad at you. I'm not in a bad mood. I love you, and I want you to come to me. So let's take advantage of that invitation this week. Let's find moments in the midst of the busyness of the season, in the midst of all the work parties and all the stuff that's going on and kids' concerts and all of that. Can we just find some moments in all of it to come to him and say, Jesus, thank you that you're my high priest. Thank you that you came to mediate, that you came to step in between these conflicted parties to bring peace. Would you bring peace to my heart? And that's the invitation. We want to invite you to come back next week. We're going to be talking about honestly, of the three gifts, I knew nothing about myrrh. until about a month ago. So we'll unpack a little bit about what's going on with myrrh, and you might want to invite a friend. It's pretty interesting. So we'll invite you to come back next week and the following week as we continue to unpack these 3 gifts that point to the ultimate gift. God bless you. Have a great week.